April 22nd, 2012. Round 1. Game 5 versus the Kings. Dan Hamhuis stumbles at center ice. Jarret Stoll steals the puck and in a blink of an eye ends the Canucks season in overtime. But this goal symbolizes more. It marks the end of the Canucks' short-lived competitive window. A window that closed with back-to-back President's trophies, but no Stanley Cup to show for it. How did we get to this point? Where is the next wave of talent, the infusion of youth to supplement the Sedins, Bieksa, Kessler, Burrows, Hamhuis, and Luongo? 2 years later, John Tortorella came out and said that this core is old. It's stale. But it did not have to be this way. The competitive window should have been extended, but it was shut because of terrible drafting. In this video, I will look back at the 5 drafts that led up to this point, and compare them to the drafts of the team that knocked them out of the playoffs and went on to win 2 Stanley Cups in 3 years. You don't want to miss this one because the results are shocking. But before I get into it, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. We're getting closer to training camp and preseason. I'm trying to hit 5,000 subs before puck drop, and I can do it with your help. Thank you. In the 5 drafts leading up to this loss, how many of the Canucks' 31 draft picks do you think went on to play at least one full season for the Canucks? 0. That's right, 0. Cody Hodgson came the closest, but was traded at the deadline in his rookie season, 1 day after I bought his jersey. Yeah, I wore a Cody Hodgson jersey to school as it was being announced during lunchtime that he was traded for Zach Kassian. That was the most humiliating cafeteria experience of my life. Before we break down the Canucks draft picks from 2007 to 2011, I want to point out the obvious. Hindsight is 2020. It's okay to miss on a pick or 2 each draft, but the point I am making is that collectively, in these 5 years, the drafting was terrible, and that is why the competitive window ended so quickly. So don't come at my neck for saying the Canucks could have taken PK Subban over Taylor Ellington. I'm only pointing out other possibilities in the multiverse. 2007. I remember yelling at Dave Nonis through the TV to take David Perron with the 25th overall pick. What did he do? He took Patrick White, who the Canucks described as the next Phil Kessel. Let me tell you right now, there will never be another Phil Kessel. So where is Patrick White now? Nobody knows. Where is David Perron? He's about to lace them up for his 18th NHL season in Ottawa. Perron made the NHL right away, so he could have helped the team immediately and long term. In the second round, with the 33rd overall pick, the Canucks reached and took Taylor Ellington, who was projected to go late in the second round. They took a D-man with 13 points in 60 games over PK Subban, a future Norris Trophy winner. Could you imagine a pairing of Edler and Subban? I'm not going to nitpick the rest of the picks in 2007 because the deeper you go in the draft, the more difficult it is to find NHL talent. But this is the worst draft in franchise history. It's the only draft in franchise history where the picks combine for a total of 0 NHL games played anywhere, not just in Vancouver. It epitomizes poor scouting and decision making. Luckily, this was the last draft under the guidance of Dave Nonis. And as we are at rock bottom, the only way to go is up. So how much did the Canucks drafting improve the next few years under Mike Gillis? Not a whole lot. Gillis took over drafting in 2008. I won't be too critical of the Hodgson pick because of his genetic condition. He could and should have been a stud for a long period of time, but I would be remiss to not point out that Erik Karlsson was still on the board. In the second round, with the 41st overall pick, Gillis made the same mistake that Nonis did a year prior. He took Jan Sauve, a defenseman with low upside, over offensive dynamo Justin Schultz, who went 2 picks later. Of course, the Canucks almost snagged Schultz as a free agent 4 years later, but he decided to go to Edmonton instead. Here's how the rest of that draft panned out. Unremarkable, except for the 7th round pick Morgan Clark, son of Ian Clark. So a bit of nepotism in play here. Oddly enough, Ian Clark was let go by the Canucks 2 years later in favor of Rolly Melanson, but he returned in 2019. 2009. This was an interesting draft. Jordan Schrader was ranked by many outlets, including the Hockey News, as a top 10 prospect. He just had an impressive World Junior tournament where he led the Americans in points. 4th overall in the tournament behind Cody Hodgson, John Tavares, and Jordan Eberle. On top of this performance, he had a dominant freshman year at Minnesota, scoring 45 points in 35 games. The excitement in Vancouver was palpable because it became clear that he was going to drop to pick number 22. You could hear the excitement in Pierre Maguire's voice as he marveled at the Canucks' future top line of Jordan Schrader and Cody Hodgson. But Schrader fell down the rankings for a reason. For one, he was one of the oldest first-time eligible prospects, just missing the cutoff for the 2008 draft by 2 weeks. Also, This is the biggest reason he fell down the rankings. He was 5'8". You would have to be a generational talent to crack the NHL at that height. And Schrader was not even at the level of Cliff Ronning. Marcus Johansson went 2 picks later, and he is still kicking around in Minnesota. Looking back, the Canucks should have taken Kyle Palmieri, a right-handed center who would have been the perfect Ryan Kesler replacement. Coincidentally enough, Jim Benning could have demanded Palmieri in the 2014 Kesler trade but settled for Nick Bonino instead. And we all know how that ended up. In the second round, the Canucks took Anton Rodin. 2 picks later, the Capitals took Dmitry Orlov. Could you imagine a pairing with Orlov's hip checks and Kevin Bieksa's Superman punches? It would have been biblical. Here's how the rest of that draft played out. The Canucks actually hit on their third rounder, Kevin Connauton, but don't be fooled by the 360 games played. None of them were played in Vancouver, as he was packaged in a deal for Derek Roy, who was unimpactful as a deadline pickup when the Canucks were swept by the Sharks in 2013. The 2010 draft. The Canucks shipped their first rounder to Florida along with Michael Grabner for Keith Ballard and did not pick until the 4th round. But just because the Canucks only had 5 picks this draft does not mean I'm going to let Mike Gillis and co. off the hook. It's the GM and scouting department's responsibility to make their picks count, especially if they are trading away multiple selections. All they needed to do for this draft to be considered a success is pick one NHLer, and they failed to do so. To make matters worse, this draft had an unusually large number of studs drafted from the 4th round onwards, including Zach Hyman, who went 8 picks after the Canucks' first selection Patrick McNally. At 145, the Canucks took Adam Polasek. Brendan Gallagher, of the Vancouver Giants I might add, went at 147. The Canucks had 2 cracks at Mark Stone, who went at 178. But instead, Vancouver took Alex Friesen at 172 and Jonathan Ilatti at 175. Alex Friesen is the only reason, Dr. Seuss over here, that this draft does not live in infamy like the 2007 draft, as Friesen suited up for a single NHL game. 2011. This draft did not generate much interest in Vancouver, if any, as it was held a week after they lost the Stanley Cup final. Personally, I don't even remember watching this draft, but looking back at it, it was another failure. The Canucks actually had 8 selections, which is 1 more than the allocated 7, but still failed to draft an NHL regular. With their first rounder, the Canucks selected Nicholas Jensen. 1 pick after him, the Ducks chose Rickard Rakell. Now, Rakell's career has been pretty inconsistent, but his 30-goal scoring prime coincided with the Sedins' twilight years. Imagine instead of signing Louis Eriksson, the Canucks had prime Rakell scoring 30 beside the Sedins. It would have saved us all the headache. At 71, the Canucks took David Honzik. Blake Coleman went at 75, and he just scored 30 last season with the Flames. But their biggest miss of the 2011 draft was Joe LeBate at 101. 3 picks later, Johnny Gaudreau went to the Flames. And this miss came back to burn the Canucks in the 2015 playoffs. Frank Corrado seemed like he was going to be a savior for this draft, but now he is an excellent reporter for TSN. Another failed draft, and a year later the Canucks contending window was shut. Here is the Canucks Army top 10 prospects list in 2012. This is not a joke. Nobody was coming to supplement the core and help extend the contention window, which was a travesty. To summarize, here's a list of players that they missed out on from 2007 to 2011. This list is not exhaustive. I only chose 1 player for each bad pick. So, for example, they could have had Orlov or Tatar instead of Rodin in 2009, but I only list Orlov. Imagine a combination of these players in the Canucks system ready to compete for jobs and extend the Canucks window. The Sedins deserved better than what they got at the end of their careers. 3 of the worst seasons in franchise history. They deserved a retool and an opportunity to compete for the cup again. As promised, let's compare their drafting to the team that eliminated them in 2012. The Los Angeles Kings. I'm just going to leave this here. I can just end the video right here with this table of the Kings' 2007 draft. Second rounder Wayne Simmons alone played more NHL games than every single Canucks pick from 2007 to 2011 combined. That is a jaw-dropping statistic. He was an excellent pick that was flipped in the Mike Richards deal, a reminder that good draft selections can then be flipped in trades for even better players. With the 95th selection, the Kings selected top 4 stalwart Alec Martinez. Dwight King rounds out this draft. So they got two players that played key roles in both of their Stanley Cup victories. A year later, the Kings just had to putt in the Doughty selection, but also nailed their second rounder, getting two-time Cup winner and eventual NHL reject Voyanov. But in 2009, just look at this. This is the most beautiful Hockey DB draft table I have ever seen. 5 NHL regulars, including 2 7th rounders. Now, most of these guys found success outside of LA, but Clifford and Nolan won 2 cups each in LA. I mentioned earlier how the Canucks drafting did not help them extend their contention window. Well, it was the complete opposite for the Kings. They did not rest on their laurels with their Stanley Cup win in 2012. Their 2014 Stanley Cup winning team included 2 rookies, Tyler Toffoli, drafted at 47 in 2010, and Tanner Pearson, an overager that they drafted in the first round of the 2012 draft. In fairness to Mike Gillis and the Canucks management, the Canucks core was older than the Kings core was, but still, that just means that the draft should have been more of a priority than it was. At the end of the day, their draft strategy was very poor. They made a lot of questionable decisions, and I still lament the fact that the Sedins went out on a whimper instead of as contenders. Sure, they traded away a lot of picks and were picking later, but contenders don't make excuses. I already outlined the Kings' draft success, but in the same time period, the Lightning also drafted Killorn, Gudas, Kucherov, Palat, and Cedric Paquette, all outside the first round. I'm not going to end this video on a sad note. What's done is done. All we can do is learn from the past, which is why I am excited about the future of the Vancouver Canucks. The core is still relatively young, and they just took the Stanley Cup finalists to 7 games with their 3rd string goalie and no Brock Besser. And guess what? They have 2 blue chip prospects coming soon, plus some really intriguing options down Highway 1 in Abbotsford. This team is being built the right way, and I for one am excited to see what the future holds. Thank you so much for hanging in there. If you guys enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It helps more than you think. And until next time, cheers.